Welcome to the Dash Mindset Podcast. I'm Sherry Zievenbergen. You were born, you're gonna die, and your adventure is your dash in between. So make the most of it. Unlock your potential in all aspects of your dash by embracing your uniqueness and living in a way that's authentic to you, not by doing more things, but by focusing on the right things. I'm a former corporate leader turned coach who's on my own journey, and I'm passionate about helping you on your journey too. So on the podcast, we'll explore how to live authentically by deciphering who you truly are and what you truly want. Are you ready to take a step toward designing your dash? Someday doesn't actually exist, so let's do it now. Hello, welcome to the Dash Mindset Podcast. It's Sherry Z, as one would expect. I hope you're having a great day, a great week, a great life, just all the things. So today we're going to wrap up strengths. At least for now. I'm certain I will talk about strengths again at some point. I talk about strengths all the time, but for now, we're going to dive into the final category of strengths, which is thinking strengths. If you haven't heard any of the other episodes about strengths, I encourage you to listen to episodes 25, 27, 28, and 30, where I shared an overview, gave some actual context, and I also dove into the other three strength categories. So today we're going to dive into thinking strengths, and the other three categories are relating, executing, and influencing strengths. So I've talked a lot about strengths. So let's dive into thinking strengths today. There are 8 thinking strengths, and you might also see them referred to as strategic thinking strengths, as categories or as themes, but they're thinking strengths or strategic thinking strengths, same thing. And they explain how an individual views the world. They're about analyzing, they're about processing, they're about generating ideas. So this is the stuff that's going on in somebody's head, right? And generally speaking, people who have 2 or more of these strengths, of thinking strengths, they prefer mental work. They're often quietly effective. You might hear them referred to as being quietly effective because their most influential work occurs in their head. So they're not necessarily going to have a product or a thing to share with you, but there are just so many things happening in their head. So they're not going to necessarily broadcast all their ideas, all their thoughts. They're not necessarily speaking up in a lot of meetings. And it's not because they don't have anything to say, that it's not that they don't have anything to contribute, but it's because they're processing. They're working through things in their head. So you might not see anything tangible from it. And for people who don't have a lot of thinking strengths, it might seem like they're not doing anything, but they absolutely are. It's just, we all operate differently, right? So here's what the 8 thinking strengths are: analytical, context, futuristic, ideation, input, intellection, learner, and strategic. So now, just as we did the last few podcast episodes where I dove into each of the strengths themes, we're going to do the same today. So I'm going to dive into each one of those 8 thinking strengths. So the first one is analytical. And I suspect when you hear the word analytical, a particular person might pop into your mind, right? And I think that's generally the case when we talk about any of these strengths. There's generally a person, right, that comes to mind. So analytical in particular. And so someone who has the analytical strength is they're going to be searching for the reasons for things, for the causes. They don't want to Band-Aid problems, right? They have the natural ability to just think about all the things, all the factors associated with a particular situation that may have caused a particular situation. And they think quite rigorously about problems. They don't just want to, like I said, Band-Aid. They're quite logical. They have a methodical thought process. And sometimes people who have this particular strength could come off as maybe dismissive of other people's ideas. And it's not ill-intentioned. And when I say it's not ill-intentioned, okay, there are probably some ill-intentioned analytical people out there, or just some ill-intentioned people all around. But people who have this particular strength, they just want to ensure that ideas are sound, that they're logical, that everything's thought through. So it's not necessarily that if you have an idea that's being maybe shot down by someone who's analytical, it's not necessarily that they don't like the idea or they disagree with it. It's just they want to understand all the factors associated with it, all the details. So some of the things that can be considered positive about this particular strength are people with this strength are generally viewed as logical, deep thinkers, smart, thorough, definitely thorough. They just think everything through. And some of the challenges that other people might see in someone with this analytical strength is they might seem like they're rude or maybe short. I don't mean height-wise. They might just have short responses, maybe curt, and just never satisfied. They just ask so many questions. It can be exhausting to someone who doesn't have this strength. And you've probably heard the phrase analysis paralysis. Oftentimes, people who have this particular strength can get caught up in the analysis of something, of any decision that needs to be made. Maybe if purchasing a car, they want to look at all the details. I automatically think about spreadsheets when I think about someone who's analytical, and partially because I have an accounting and finance background, so I lived in the world of spreadsheets and was surrounded by analytical people in a lot of cases. But someone who has analytical as their number 34 probably doesn't appreciate a good spreadsheet. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. We just operate differently. So some of the people who might fall into this category, and these are all generalizations. Generally, when we generalize, when we talk about different types of people, we're generalizing, right? It's not that every person in the world fits into this category if I'm mentioning them, but actuaries, pretty analytical, right? Very numbers oriented. Someone who has analytical as a number 34 strength probably isn't going to go into the actuarial world, right? They're not going to go into actuarial science. So I'll just kind of speak to some examples using the context of the corporate environment, since that's where I came from. So one thing that, anyone in the corporate environment or in any environment, we always have to think about how we're interacting with other people and people of varying styles and with different strengths, right? So for me in the corporate environment, if I was going into a meeting with actuaries or with accountants or with anyone in a different in different teams, each team has a slightly different culture, right? It doesn't matter if you're in the same city, in the same building, they're just different styles, different cultures, right? If I were to go into a meeting with actuaries and it was me, I would still be myself, but I would need to consider that, okay, here's the audience is actuaries. I'm going to need to provide a lot of detail. They're going to expect that detail. And if I don't present it at that time when they want it, I'm certainly going to have to share it later, right? So in general, when we're talking about strengths, it's good to consider all of the audiences when we're meeting with people, when we're trying to determine, how do we adapt, right? To relate in the way we want. So, okay, actuaries, accountants, analysts of any sort, detail-oriented people are generally analytical. Okay, and oftentimes it can be exhausting if you are someone who doesn't have that strength to work with someone who's analytical, because you might get to the point where you think, why can't you just trust me? Why do you need all the details? It just doesn't make sense, right? It absolutely does make sense to someone who has the analytical strength. And it's something it's not just that they want it, they need it. They feel as if they need details, right? In order to make decisions, in order to ensure that something is sound. So that's the way analytical people operate. So I suspect somebody in particular may have come to mind. No, they're not trying to make your life miserable necessarily. Maybe they are, I don't know, but generally they're not. Okay, context. So context is the next strength, and people who have the context strength really focus on the past. And it's important to them, not because they're trying to dwell on the past or they're trying to live in the past, but because the past is important to understand the present. So in order to understand what we're currently experiencing, someone who has the context strength really needs to understand, okay, certainly somebody has gone through this before. Let's understand what that looks like, because that'll help us understand what we're experiencing today. So they want to understand, okay, what was the intent way back, whenever this thing happened? And what are we experiencing now? How does that relate? And what can we potentially expect to experience based on what happened in the past? So some of the things that can be viewed as positive about someone with context is they learn lessons from the past, right? They're not going to just keep, repeating, the definition of insanity is continuing to do the same thing and expecting a different outcome, right? People who have the context strength are less likely to do that. They're going to be more likely to recognize it right away and just not do that. They can leverage knowledge from the past and understand, okay, here's where we are now. They don't have to go through the entire experience to understand. Some of the things that others can see challenging about working with someone or just interacting with someone with this particular strength is they might seem closed-minded, as if they're living in the past, they're stuck in the past, and they're just really slow to react to change. They might be viewed as resistant to change or just, they don't want change. They're not team players, whatever that is. They're stuck in the past. But again, it's just that's how they automatically think, how they operate. So you have likely been in a meeting, regardless of what your work situation is, or maybe this is someone, within your family, where you're brainstorming, you're coming up with ideas, and, maybe there's an excited group of people who wants to, do something new. But there's that one guy, and I'm just going to say guy, maybe it's a gal, but there's a person, right, who says, nope, we tried that in 1994, and let me tell you how that went. It didn't work. I'll tell you all the reasons why. And they actually remember all the reasons why, and they're just going to lay it out there because all that's just, in their head. Like they pulled out a file cabinet drawer and they just referred to all of these details. They're just in there because that's the way their brain works. So, and that can be really deflating, right? If you are really pumped up about something and you're working with a team who's excited about something, and then there's that guy who talks about 1984 or 94 or whatever year it was, it can be really deflating. So it's not necessarily that guy wants to bring everybody down, but it's just, he wants to think about, hey, this has already happened. Let's not repeat this challenge. So it doesn't mean that everyone who does this, by the way, in a meeting and is deflating to everyone with ideas, it doesn't mean that this is necessarily in their top 5 strengths, but it's likely not their number 20, or likely not their number 34, right? Okay, futuristic. So people who have the futuristic strength they're really inspiring to others because they just have a vision. They share their vision and they can see the details of what the future might hold. And it's vivid to them. It just is. It's not something they have to work to come up with. They just automatically think, okay, here's what the future looks like. Here are the details around it. Here's, it's vivid to me. And they ask the question, wouldn't it be great if a lot? And that's the way their brain, just automatically works. So they're generally imaginative, creative, inspiring, and they just have that clear picture and they're able to share it in a way that can inspire others. Now, some of the challenges is with this might be if you're someone who's not inspired by that vivid, detailed vision, that vision of the future, and you're thinking, okay, this guy is just a dreamer. His head's in the clouds. He's just coming out of nowhere with this stuff. It's just nonsense, right? And especially, okay, so even if someone has another thinking strength, let's say that thinking strength is analytical, even those two people have 2 thinking strengths that are processing and a lot in their head, they might be completely on different paths because someone who is thinking a lot about the future versus someone who's thinking a lot about all the details and wants to ensure that decisions and ideas are sound, they're going to be coming from completely different sides of the something. They're going to be coming at it from competing perspectives, right? So it might just seem like, okay, if someone's analytical, they're just going to be thinking, okay, this is irrational. It's unrealistic. Why are you even considering this, right? You're just not thinking things through. But they can be really inspiring to other people. So yeah, the analytical and futuristic folks might not necessarily be in agreement. And so it's just something to consider. It doesn't mean anyone's trying to take somebody else down. It's just, very, very different thought process. All right. Ideation. Oh my goodness. I love talking to people who have ideation. It is not one of my top strengths. And I am just awed by people who have this. And I love working with people who have this particular strength. So people with this strength they're fascinated by ideas. They're able to see connections between things. They're creative. They see new ideas as just so exciting. They're just thrilled by them. And some of the challenges that other people might see with this strength is that they are maybe focused on serendipity, that they're impractical. Maybe they don't follow through on things. They're creating more work for other people. And, some of that is because someone who has ideation they have so many ideas. They want to tackle all of them because they're so excited by all of the ideas. And people with ideation have so many ideas, it's just not possible for them to tackle all of them. So one situation that might be particularly challenging is if you are working for someone, working with with a leader who has ideation, you might feel like you are just running all over the place and just, where is this person coming from? Because this person told me to do one thing and now they're telling me to do another thing and now they're telling me to do something else. And you just don't have the ability to follow through because this person's mind is changing all the time. So it's not that this person is a nut job. It's just that they just have so many ideas and they are actually they're genuinely excited about all the ideas that they don't necessarily recognize that other people's brains work differently, and they don't even recognize what the impact they have on other people and how exhausting it is to other people because they're accustomed to being that way, right? And they're just a lot of times, flying all over the place trying to implement all of these ideas. So I love working with people who have this. Again, I don't remember offhand what number it is for me, but it's kind of in the middle. And I don't spew ideas. I come up with ideas, but I don't just spew them. Someone with ideation just spews ideas. And so I really enjoy if I'm just stuck on something and I think, okay, I know there are lots of ways to do this thing, whatever this thing is. If I reach out to someone who I know who has ideation, there are times I haven't been able to write or type fast enough to keep up with the ideas that someone with this is spewing at me. And so it just amazes me. So what I suggest to people who I've worked with who have this and are exhausted by it, because that's often the case, they generally don't want to have all these ideas. They just can't make them stop, right? What I suggest to people is that they just keep all their ideas in one place. So when they have an idea, it's not that they should just try to turn it off in their mind, but maybe just consolidate all their ideas in one place, like a Word document, an Evernote, whatever. So they can kind of a parking lot, right? Sometimes in meetings, and this is something to do in meetings too. If there's someone who keeps coming up with all these ideas and is all over the place, it's good to acknowledge that person's ideas and without just dismissing them and saying, okay, yeah, we did that in 1984 or 94 or whatever, or yeah, we're focusing on this now, stop talking. Instead, acknowledge that person's ideas because that's going to incentivize them to keep coming up with ideas. And that's what we want, right? In organizations. So I would suggest parking lot them, write them on the whiteboard, put them somewhere that's visible so that person feels acknowledged, doesn't feel dismissed, and actually keep them somewhere so that they can be referred to at some point. Because a lot of times when we're frustrated by all these ideas that someone's spewing, it's not that we think they're bad. It's just we can't possibly implement everything, right? So I encourage people to really, if you work with someone who has this, acknowledge, put somewhere that's visible. And if you are someone who has this particular strength, I encourage you to just keep all your ideas in one document, like a Word document, an Evernote on your phone, one place. Otherwise, you're going to be just swimming in Post-it notes and you're going to feel overwhelmed. So anyway, it's good stuff. And generally, they're not ill-intentioned. It's just, like all the others, they just work differently. Okay, input is another one. So someone who has input they just crave information. They want to know more. They want to know all the things. And so they just keep acquiring information, compiling it. It's almost like their brain is, and I kind of think about all of our brains this way, that we have these filing cabinets in there, but someone who has input has, I don't know, maybe 1 billion little file cabinets with all of this information just stored away. And someone with this particular strength just kind of, they can't make it stop. They just crave as much information as they can get their hands on. And they don't necessarily know what they're going to do with it or why they want it or if they'll ever need it, but they just want to tuck it away just in case. They're great resources, knowledgeable, they have great memories, and they just collect a lot of things. Sometimes it can be in the form of actual physical things, in addition to information. And they can be really good conversationalists because they know so much stuff. They're interesting people. Some of the challenges associated with this is that it can seem as if their mind, potentially their space, is cluttered because there's just so much. And oftentimes people who have this strength say, oh yeah, I have a bunch of worthless information in my brain, because they likely do. So I will share my husband, this is not in his top 5, but and he has not unlocked his Clifton Strengths 34 report. And that's the report that you can see in Clifton Strengths if I can't remember how much it costs, but you can, if you've taken the assessment, the report that you generally buy initially is the top 5 report. And it tells you, here are your top 5. You can also access the rest of your strengths to see how the rest of your strengths line up for you. And so that's your Clifton Strengths 34 report. Anyway, I want my husband to get it at some point. He hasn't yet. But my point is, I'm nearly certain this is his number 6. It's certainly in his number 10. But an example of this is when we go to museums, he reads all the things. And I'm not kidding. He reads all of the things. And he really just doesn't understand how someone such as myself would not read all the things, because he's truly genuinely interested in all the things. And what's just especially fascinating to me is that he remembers all the things. Now, when I read things, I kind of remember. I might be able to say, oh yeah, I think we saw that in a museum once. But those details don't stick with me. And it's not that I'm uninterested. It's just, I know, okay, I'm not going to retain this. 5 minutes from now, I'm not going to be able to explain it. But yeah, my husband actually can. He can explain these things. So he's okay. So he's the kind of guy that he can tell you specific dates when things happened. He can tell you, you can bring up any war, he'll tell you the dates, who was involved, why, all the things. And I'm more like, well, yeah, the World War II. Let's see, Germany was involved. I mean, my brain doesn't operate that way. And another thing he'll do is he'll often say, okay, so he and I were both born in 1975. Okay, you can do the math. And he'll say things like, remember in 1982 when President Reagan did, I don't know, whatever. And I'm looking at him like, no, I don't remember. I was 7. You were also 7. I was 7. I was playing with dolls. I didn't, I probably knew Reagan was president. Maybe, I don't know, but I didn't know what he was doing. I vaguely remember Reagan being president because he served a couple terms. And by the time I was older, maybe I was paying a little bit of attention, but no, he'll remember 1982 on this date. Oh, okay. So anyway, I love that. I appreciate about that. that about him so much. It's just, it can be confusing because I know that there have been times when we've been on vacation and he will go to a museum separately because he knows that I'm just going to kind of go do and get the gist. He's going to want to take his time and read everything, which is fine. I totally appreciate and respect that. But we're just different that way. And it's very confusing to him that I don't want to read everything, right? So, but we're figuring it out. We've gotten to that point. We understand it and we just figure out, okay, how do we do this, right? Okay, so intellection is the next one. And intellection is people who have this strength, really, they just like to think. They have this constant hum, this constant mental hum, just this constant mental activity. And they're very introspective. They really enjoy alone time, not because they just enjoy alone time, but so they can reflect and so they can think. They're capable of really deep philosophical thoughts, and they really enjoy working alone. It doesn't mean they can't work with other people, but they really genuinely enjoy working alone. Some of the challenges with that from the perspectives of other people is they can be viewed as maybe loners. Maybe they're not great team players, or they could be viewed as that because they work alone a lot, or maybe even prefer working alone. Might be perceived as wasting time thinking because sometimes they're so deep in thought. They can be effectively or quietly effective, and it might seem as if they're not churning out a thing, right? But it's because there's so much going on in their minds. And they're not particularly interested in small talk. They can be great conversationalists and have great conversation if it's something that's interesting to them. But otherwise, small talk just seems like a waste of time. Why would you do that? Why would you talk about this, high level, surface level stuff? It's just kind of a waste. Okay, so that's intellection. Learner. So people who have the learner strength are, they just constantly want to improve. They are always learning. They're interested in a lot of things. They find life in general just intriguing, and they catch on quickly to things. They're just always in a state of learning. They always want to be learning. And so their interests, though, so input is, getting your hands on lots of information, right? Like, reading everything at a museum. Learner is different in that it's what your interests are actually what guide your intentions. So always interested in learning something new, not necessarily just information, but, something that you feel like you can do something with. And some of the challenges associated with learners are that they might seem, book smart, or as if they lack focus on results because they're constantly consuming. They might be viewed as know-it-alls. And sometimes that curiosity can lead to just, learning about stuff that's not necessarily relevant because you can kind of just keep going with it, right? So the example I'll share here is a personal example again. I have learner in my top 5. It's the thinking strength I have. And I have to be careful when I'm working with people because I get really excited about books and podcasts and get super excited about all that stuff. When it's related to a topic that interests me, which is anything personal growth related, anything about how people tick, I just eat that stuff up. Can't get enough of it. So I have to be really thoughtful about how much I am consuming because I can just listen to podcasts nonstop. And so when I'm working with people, I have to be really careful not to say, oh, you need to read this book and this book and this book and listen to this podcast. And because it could be overwhelming. And then what am I supposed to do here? Right. So I have to be really thoughtful about that and, be really deliberate in what I suggest to people. So what's interesting to me about this one, so here's an example. My husband and I both have learner. And sometimes we think, oh, if I could only interact with people who have the same strengths as me, that would be great, right? But even if you do have the same strength as someone else, you're going to be different in the way you utilize that strength. So, for instance, my husband, like I said, he's interested in lots of things. And so he could easily, he'll learn about one thing and then he'll lead him to another thing. If he's online and he's investigating, maybe he goes from reading about the migration patterns of pandas. He starts reading about that. And then, shortly after he'll be telling me about, what's interesting about the consumption of oatmeal in the United States, right? And to me, it's like, wait, what? But one thing will lead him to another thing that he's interested in, will lead him to another, will lead him to another. That would never happen to me. I don't get pulled into, oh, now I need to read this and this and this, because my interests are pretty specific in, okay, what makes people tick? I'm mildly interested when he shares those facts. And, I think, okay, that's kind of interesting about oatmeal consumption, but that's not, I'm not going to do anything with that, whatever. So me, on the other hand, I have this, a little bit of an addiction, maybe. I need to own up to that, to books and podcasts. Specific, like I said, to personal growth, basically anything related to what make people tick. And so my husband, if I'll say, which I often do, I'll say, oh my gosh, I'm reading this book right now and it is so good. He always gives me the same look and says, is it better than the last one? Like, oh, well, that was really good too. So it's funny how we each have that strength, but we use it differently. So something to keep in mind, if you feel like, oh, it would be a blissful world if everybody had the same strengths as me, it would just be different. It would just be different. So, okay, strategic is the next one. And that's the last one. Okay, so strategic. People who have this particular strength I'm in awe of these people too. So they can just quickly jump from, okay, we're at point A, they can quickly jump to point Z and no one can see it coming. And generally speaking, people will think, what? Where, how did you get there? And they can't really explain it. It's a skill that can't be taught. So they're able to just quickly sort through the clutter that other people might be focused on. They want to get from point A and then they focus on how to get to point B and how to get to point C. Someone who has strategic can jump from A to, Q, whatever. And they just discard all of the clutter. They just play out all the scenarios, all the alternative scenarios, and they can automatically see what's coming around the corner and think it all through in just a matter of seconds. So it's really hard for people who have this strength to explain it. And sometimes they're not necessarily, they might not be considered or taken seriously because it can't be explained. And other people just think, what do you, so they make solid decisions though. And they can plan for all of the unexpected things. It's just that for people who don't have this strength, it might seem as if they hadn't thought it all through, right? So some of the challenges could be that they might seem aloof. They might seem like in some cases, they might seem slow because they're thinking through all the things and maybe aren't as quick to act. But it's just because they can think through all the things in a different way without, necessarily verbalizing it or having, 17 meetings about it. So it's just this particular one can be misunderstood. All strengths can be misunderstood and are misunderstood, but this one in particular comes to mind. And so I actually worked with someone who has this particular strength, and she has ideation as well. And her brain is so fascinating to me. And it works different from other brains, which, all our brains work differently from others. But she would just immediately jump 40 steps ahead. She'd have all these ideas as well. And so she said to me, on multiple occasions, actually, that she would often get this, what? look from people when she was sharing her thoughts in meetings or in various scenarios. And there were times when she would share something with me about, oh, she had done this thing or this thing, which just was just whatever she shared blew me away because her thought process, her ideas, everything, the way she thinks so strategically is so different from the way I think. I'm certain I had a particular look, and I would look at her and say, is this the look other people give you? Because if it is, it's not because they think you're, taking something. It's because they just can't get their head around it. They just don't understand. Because I was always, so impressed and blown away by her thoughts and her ideas and everything she shared. It was not, oh yeah, let's just ignore you because you don't have anything to say. It was just general confusion because my brain thinks so differently. So, people who have this strength are really, they should be listened to and not dismissed because you don't understand. If we understood everybody 100%, it would be a really boring place, right? So I, in general, so those are all 8. Those are all 8 of the thinking strengths. But I just want to share in general, I think this is kind of funny and might be relatable. If it's not you, somebody you know. So my husband has 3 of his 5 strengths are top strengths are thinking strengths. I have 1. And that one is learner, which he has as well. And we're different for a lot of reasons. But I think something he shared relatively recently was just such a good kind of summarized us well and the differences between us pretty well. So I have a tendency, I will be flying around the house. Like I'll be in one room and then I'll be in another room and I'll keep the lights on. And that drives him crazy because he doesn't understand why I don't turn the lights off and all the things. And he will generally he'll go to a room and then he'll be in that room. I, on the other end, am going from room to room to room. Maybe I'll jump, run upstairs. I'll come downstairs. And so one day I was buzzing around the house like I generally do. And then I went and sat in my office and I was going to, start working. And he walked in and he said, I have it figured out. I realized that you're like a hummingbird. That's what he said to me. So I'm like a hummingbird. And he said, you're constantly flying from room to room. You're basically all over the place. And you are absolutely right. I am very hummingbird-like. Yeah. And then we decided he was like an owl. So I'm jumping all over the place. He was more owl-like. So he'll go to a room or he'll go somewhere and he'll just stay there. And he'll, have all his intellectual thoughts. He'll have ideas. He'll read a book and he'll just stay there. And he doesn't use a lot of words unless they're necessary, right? So he'll just turn his head to maybe look at something and maybe hoo a little bit. And in the meantime, I'm running around the house. I'm, verbally processing. I'm, talking to anybody who's in any of the rooms. And hummingbird versus owl. So I don't know. I think about that a lot when we're operating very differently. And, that might be helpful to you too. So, okay, that is all about thinking strengths. I mean, clearly it's not 100% of everything that would be helpful to know about them, but I shared about each one. So someone who has primarily thinking strengths, what's helpful is if you partner with someone, if you're one of those people who has primarily thinking strengths or 2 or more thinking strengths out of your top 5, it's helpful to partner with someone who has other strengths, such as relating strengths, influencing strengths, or executing strengths. And if you have primarily thinking strengths, it doesn't mean you can't interact with people well. It doesn't mean that you can't influence. It doesn't mean you don't get things done. It's just that you do it differently, right? So with any of these strengths, if you have primarily one type of strength, so I'll actually use Kristen Sherry. She was in episode 2 of my podcast, and she's the one who developed UMAP. She has 4 out of 5 of her top 5 strengths are thinking strengths. And so she doesn't have any executing strengths in her top 5. So something she shared is that she figured out which executing strength she had that was highest for her, and she leans into that one. So it's not that she can't get anything done. She had to just figure out how to get things done most effectively in her way, right? So that's what I would recommend to you. If you have thinking strengths and you're concerned about the others that aren't in your top 5, just figure out, okay, which is my highest relating strength and lean into that one, or which is my highest executing strength and lean into that one. So Yeah. So that's what I would recommend to you. And just think about how people generally aren't trying to make your life miserable, right? They're just operating differently. And so if you're misunderstood, that's often one of the reasons, one of the main factors and why that's the case. So thank you for being here. I really, really appreciate you listening, you showing up for the podcast. I would love, always would love your ideas on what you'd like to hear more about. If there's anything specific to strengths, if you want me to dive into something deeper, maybe share more examples, I would love to do that. Please just reach out to me on my website. My website's in the notes below, but I have the contact tab and you can reach out there. And if you want a free consult, if you want to dig deeper into your strengths, into your values, into your saboteurs, into anything that I work with people on, which is basically anything human related. Well, okay, that's a bit far. But I love helping people understand what makes them tick. I love further understanding what makes me tick. And so if you'd like some help, or just figure out, okay, can Sherry help me with this? I would love to have a consult with you. So again, you can reach out to me on my contact page on my website, and we can set up a time, free consult, and we'll chat and see how I can help. If you would like help with your team, better understanding your team, that is so helpful to leaders and to team members to understand how and why they're interacting the way they are. Super helpful. So I can help there as well. So reach out. Thank you for being here today, and I will see you soon. Thanks so much for listening to the Dash Mindset Podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player, tell your friends, and leave us a review. Follow me on my social media platforms highlighted in the show notes, and get in touch with me at thedashmindset.com. Share the topics you'd like me to explore in future episodes. Thanks again for listening to the Dash Mindset Podcast. We'll see you next time. Design and differentiate your dash your way and make today amazing.